It is October 13th, 1977. Lufthansa Flight 181 lifts off from Palma de Mallorca, bound for Frankfurt. On board, 86 passengers, 5 crew. A routine charter flight. A Thursday afternoon. 25 minutes into the flight, 4 individuals produce weapons. Within moments, the aircraft is no longer a scheduled airliner. It is a hostage vehicle. The hijackers, members of the Palestinian militant group PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, redirect the aircraft south, or Aden. The Boeing 737 begins what will become a 7,000-kilometer odyssey. Rome, Cyprus, Bahrain, Dubai, Aden, Mogadishu. A week of captivity across 5 countries. They have one primary demand: the release of 11 Red Army faction prisoners held in West German jails, including the RAF's founding generation, Andreas Baader, Gudrun Ensslin, and Jan Karl Raspe, and 2 Palestinian militants held in Turkey, plus a ransom of $15 million. The context matters. This is not an isolated act. On the Lufthansa hijacking is the final operation of what West Germany called the German Autumn, Deutscher Herbst, the peak of a coordinated campaign by the Red Army faction to collapse the West German state through simultaneous domestic violence and international pressure. The West German government has exactly one option it will not take: negotiate from a position of capitulation. What follows is the story of how a state builds the capability it does not yet have, and in the middle of a crisis, it cannot afford to lose. This is how GSG9 was built, and how it was tested. To understand the Mogadishu operation, you must first understand what West Germany was in 1977 and what it was fighting. The Federal Republic of Germany in the mid-1970s was, by any external measure, one of the most successful democratic states in the world. Its economy was the 3rd largest on earth. Its institutions were robust. It had rebuilt from near total destruction in a generation. But West Germany in 1977 was also a state with a particular anxiety about the use of state violence. The reason was not abstract. Within living memory, a German government had used police and military power to commit genocide. The Basic Law, West Germany's constitution, had been written with explicit provisions against the re-emergence of authoritarian executive power. The country's security apparatus had been deliberately constrained. This constraint created a problem. The late 1960s and early 1970s saw the emergence of a generation of left-wing militant groups across Western Europe who believed that the capitalist democracies were structurally equivalent to fascism and therefore legitimate targets. In West Germany, the most significant of these groups was the Rote Armee Fraktion, the Red Army faction, known internationally by its German initials, RAF. The RAF was founded in 1970 by Andreas Baader, Gudrun Ensslin, and journalist Ulrike Meinhof. Its ideology was a synthesis of anti-imperialism, Marxist-Leninist analysis, and the conviction that the Federal Republic was a fascist state disguised by democratic institutions. Its operational model was urban guerrilla warfare: bombings, bank robberies, assassinations, kidnappings. By 1977, the RAF's first generation of leadership was in prison, awaiting trial in a specially constructed high-security facility at Stammheim. But their imprisonment had not ended the campaign. It had radicalized it. The 2nd and 3rd generation of RAF operators continued operations. And critically, the RAF had cultivated operational relationships with Palestinian militant groups, particularly the PFLP, who could conduct operations internationally on the RAF's behalf. The events of 1977 were not random. They were the product of a deliberate, a coordinated strategic campaign designed to force the West German government into a choice it could not make without destroying itself. On April 7, 1977, federal prosecutor Siegfried Buback was assassinated in Karlsruhe by an RAF gunman while stopped at a traffic light. 3 people died. On July 30, 1977, Jürgen Ponto, chairman of the Dresdner Bank, was shot dead at his home in a failed kidnapping attempt. The attackers included a woman who had been introduced to Ponto as a family friend. On September 5, 1977, the most operationally significant date, Hans Martin Schleyer, president of the Confederation of German Employers Associations and a former SS officer, was kidnapped in Cologne. His driver and 3 police escorts were killed in the ambush. Schleyer was now the RAF's primary bargaining chip, held at an undisclosed location in West Germany. The demand was simple: release the Stammheim prisoners. Chancellor Helmut Schmidt convened a crisis committee, the Small Crisis Group, that would meet continuously for the next 44 days. The government's position was non-negotiation. But non-negotiation under these conditions was not passive. It required active intelligence work to locate Schleyer, active diplomatic engagement with foreign governments, and the development of a military option that did not yet fully exist. On October 13th, the Lufthansa hijacking began. The Palestinians had entered the campaign. The crisis entered its terminal phase. To understand why West Germany did not yet have a fully capable counterterrorism unit in 1977, you must go back 5 years to Munich. On September 5, 1972, exactly 5 years before Schleyer's kidnapping, a coincidence that was not lost on anyone, 8 members of the Palestinian militant group Black September seized 11 Israeli athletes and coaches at the Olympic Village in Munich. The Munich massacre is the founding trauma of modern counterterrorism. The West German response was catastrophic. Police marksmen positioned at the airfield attempted to ambush the terrorists and hostages as they boarded 2 helicopters. The operation had no tactical coordination, no communication between shooters, no contingency planning. In the resulting firefight, all 9 remaining hostages were killed, along with a German police officer and 5 of the 8 terrorists. The post-Munich analysis was damning. West Germany had no specialized counterterrorism capability. Its police forces were not trained for hostage rescue. Its military, the Bundeswehr, was constitutionally prohibited from domestic law enforcement operations. There was no institutional home for the capability that Munich had demonstrated was necessary. The response was the creation of Grenzschutzgruppe 9, GSG9, in April 1973. Established within the Federal Border Police, the GSG9 was a legal workaround. Technically police, organizationally specialized, operationally capable of the type of direct action that neither regular police nor the military could legally perform in Germany. Its founding commander was Ulrich Wegener, a career border police officer who had been present at Munich as an observer and had studied counterterrorism capabilities in Israel and the United States in the aftermath. And then Wegener's approach to building GSG9 was methodical. Recruit from the best of the existing border police, establish a rigorous selection and training process, develop doctrine, acquire equipment, build relationships with allied counterterrorism organizations. Between 1973 and 1977, GSG9 trained. It had never conducted a live operational deployment of the type it was now being called to execute. when the Lufthansa hijacking began on October 13, 1977. The West German government's crisis response system activated with a clarity of structure that contrasted sharply with the Munich chaos of 5 years earlier. At the political level, Chancellor Schmidt's small crisis group, the same body managing the Schleier kidnapping, became the decision authority for the hijacking response. Schmidt had already made the fundamental decision: non-negotiation. The operational question was not whether to rescue the hostages, but how and when. At the operational level, Ulrich Wegener and GSG9 were activated immediately. Wegener's initial task was not tactical planning. It was intelligence collection. Where would the aircraft go? What were the terrorists' capabilities? How many were there? What was their psychological state? What was the physical configuration of the aircraft? The Boeing 737 configuration was a known variable. GSG9 had access to Lufthansa's technical documentation on the 737. Floor plans, door configurations, emergency exit locations, cockpit access points. This documentation formed the static intelligence baseline for any assault plan. The dynamic variable was the aircraft's location. For an operation like this, location was everything. Flight 181 did not stay in one place. The hijackers moved it deliberately. A common tactic in extended hostage scenarios, designed to complicate rescue planning, exhaust negotiators, and demonstrate operational reach. The aircraft flew from Palma to Rome, where it was refueled after a standoff, then to Larnaca, Cyprus, where negotiations produced nothing, then to Bahrain, where it was initially refused landing permission, then to Dubai, where it remained for 23 hours, then to Aden, South Yemen, a state with no diplomatic relationship with West Germany and no obligation to cooperate. Then, finally, to Mogadishu, Somalia. Each stop was a new planning problem. GSG9 and a planning team followed the aircraft's movement on updating assault plans for each potential final location. An assault in Dubai presented different challenges from an assault in Aden. The political access was different, the airfield geometry was different, and the hostile government variable was live in South Yemen. Mogadishu changed the calculus. Somalia's government, under President Mohammed Siad Barre, was willing to cooperate with West Germany. This was diplomatically achieved through intense back-channel communication between Bonn and Mogadishu, reportedly with Saudi mediation. Siad Barre's cooperation meant that GSG9 would have airfield access, would not face a hostile state's military opposition, and would be operating in a permissive environment. From the moment Mogadishu cooperation was confirmed, the operational window opened, and the intelligence picture on the hijackers was assembled over the course of the week-long crisis from multiple sources. The leader of the four-person team was Zohair Yusuf Akache, a PFLP operative operating under the name Captain Martyr Mahmoud. Akache was known to West German intelligence. He had been identified in connection with previous PFLP operations. His psychological profile indicated an individual capable of executing threats. Within hours of boarding the aircraft, he had shot the captain, Jürgen Schumann, after Schumann had made unauthorized contact with ground authorities during the Aden stopover. Schumann's body was dumped on the tarmac. His co-pilot then flew the aircraft to Mogadishu under duress. The death of Captain Schumann was operationally significant for two reasons. First, it confirmed that the lead hijacker would follow through on violent threats. Second, it meant the aircraft was being flown by a co-pilot under extreme psychological stress, which affected the timeline of any assault. The three other hijackers, 2 women and 1 man, were also PFLP operatives. Their weapons included pistols and grenades. The grenade threat was the critical constraint on the assault plan. A grenade detonated inside a Boeing 737 fuselage at ground level would cause catastrophic casualties. The assault had to be fast enough to prevent any hijacker from pulling a pin. One of the less publicized but operationally significant aspects of the Mogadishu operation was the presence of 2 British Special Air Service advisors as part of the GSG9 deployment. The SAS had developed, through its operations in Northern Ireland and its ongoing counterterrorism mandate, a set of techniques and equipment that were not part of GSG9's standard toolkit at this stage. Specifically, the SAS brought stun grenades, the L2A1 flashbang, a device that GSG9 did not yet have in its inventory. The flashbang concept was straightforward. A device that produces an extremely bright flash and a very loud concussive bang, disorienting anyone in proximity for several seconds without causing permanent injury. Used at the moment of entry, it would give the assault team a window of disorientation during which they could engage threats before those threats could respond. The integration of SAS personnel and SAS equipment into a German national counterterrorism operation represents a model of Allied counterterrorism cooperation that would become standard in subsequent decades. In 1977, it was improvised under operational pressure on the fact that it worked. That 2 British advisors could be integrated into a German assault team's plan within days reflects both the professionalism of both units and the value of the pre-existing relationship between the organizations. In October 1977, GSG9 was 4 years old. It had 180 personnel organized into 3 strike teams of approximately 30 operators each, a communications element, a technical support element, and a training cadre. Its selection process required candidates to pass a series of physical and psychological tests that eliminated the vast majority of applicants. The unit's training program had been developed with reference to several Allied counterterrorism organizations, most significantly the Israeli Sayeret Matkal and the British SAS. Training covered hostage rescue assault techniques, close quarters battle in aircraft and building environments, combat swimming, parachute insertion, and the full range of preparation required for direct action. What GSG9 had not done by October 1977 was execute a live hostage rescue from an aircraft. Mogadishu would be its operational debut in every meaningful sense. Wegener selected his best operators, approximately 30 individuals, and built the assault plan around specific techniques they had rehearsed repeatedly. The Boeing 737 is a narrow-body aircraft with a single aisle and multiple entry points. From an assault perspective, it presented both challenges and opportunities. A single aisle channels movement and creates a predictable axis of engagement. But multiple entry points allow simultaneous breaches that overwhelm a defender's ability to respond. GSG9 built its assault plan around simultaneous entry through multiple doors. The timing requirement was precise. All doors had to open within a fraction of a second of each other. The team rehearsed the sequence against a Lufthansa 737 made available at Frankfurt, an advantage that cannot be overstated. It meant the team experienced the exact geometry, sight lines, and constraints they would face at Mogadishu. GSG9's primary weapon was the Heckler & Koch MP5. It was well suited to the aircraft environment, compact, reliable, and using 9mm ammunition with lower overpenetration risk than rifle rounds. Supplementing the MP5 were P9 pistols as sidearms, and the SAS provided stun grenades. The team also carried rope ladders and hooks for approaching entry points without using monitored stairs, breaching tools for forced entry, and medical equipment for immediate casualty treatment. GSG9 and its supporting elements had been following the aircraft throughout its week-long journey. When the 737 landed at Mogadishu on the night of October 17th, and Somali cooperation was confirmed, the final planning phase began. Wegener and his team had roughly 12 hours to finalize and rehearse the assault plan against the specific conditions at Aden International Airport. The airfield geometry was assessed. The aircraft's position on the tarmac was established. Approach routes for each assault element were planned. The timing sequence for stun grenades and door entries was set. Communication protocols were established, and negotiations continued throughout this period. Not because West Germany intended to concede, but because active negotiations kept the hijackers engaged and reduced their alertness. A tactical diversion was incorporated. Somali authorities, at the request of the German assault team, lit a fire on the runway approximately 100 to 150 meters in front of the aircraft. The explanation delivered to the hijackers was that a technical issue required the fire. In reality, that it drew attention toward the front of the aircraft and created a light boundary. The area around the wings and rear, where the assault team would approach, remained in relative darkness. This is tactical deception. Create a false priority for the adversary's attention and execute the real action in the resulting blind spot. The operation launched at approximately midnight, Mogadishu time. Chancellor Schmidt had given final authorization from Bonn. The assault team approached the aircraft using rope ladders to reach wing emergency exits and forward doors. They moved in darkness, in silence, with the runway fire providing distraction and defining their shadow corridor. At the designated moment, coordinated by radio signal, stun grenades were thrown simultaneously through opened emergency exits. The grenades detonated inside the aircraft, within fractions of a second of each other, you're producing a simultaneous flash and concussive effect across the cabin. Simultaneously, entry points were breached. Assault teams entered from front and rear, moving toward each other down the single aisle. Akache was in the cockpit area when the assault began. He emerged and engaged the entry team with a pistol and attempted to throw a grenade. He was shot. The grenade he had armed detonated under a seat, causing minor injuries to several passengers, but not the catastrophic casualties the assault plan had been engineered to prevent. 2 other hijackers were shot and wounded. The 4th was wounded and subsequently captured. The assault itself, from first entry to last shot, took approximately 7 minutes. All 86 passengers and crew survived. No GSG9 operator was killed, though several sustained minor injuries. The operation was complete. At 7 o'clock on the morning of October 18th, the West German government announced the successful rescue at Mogadishu. Within hours, news reached the Stammheim prison. Andreas Bader, Gudrun Enslin, and Jan Karl Raspe were found dead in their cells. They had apparently obtained pistols through means that remained disputed and had killed themselves. A 4th prisoner, Irmgard Müller, survived stab wounds. The same morning, the body of Hans Martin Schleyer, kidnapped 44 days earlier, was found in the trunk of a car in Mulhouse, France. He had been executed. The German autumn was over. The structural analysis of these events is complex. The West German government maintained its non-negotiation position throughout a 44-day siege. The cost was Schleyer's life. The gain was the demonstration that the state could not be coerced into releasing its most dangerous prisoners through the taking of hostages. Whether that demonstration was worth the cost is a question that governments facing terrorist coercion have debated since 1977. What is analytically clear is that the non-negotiation position, supported by an active military rescue capability, changed the strategic calculus for future operations against West German targets. The Mogadishu operation was never repeated. The Mogadishu operation established several principles that became foundational to Western counterterrorism doctrine. First was the primacy of speed in aircraft assault. It worked because it was fast enough to prevent hijackers from responding coherently before they were engaged. Every second of warning given to a defender is a second during which they can detonate a grenade, shoot a hostage, or block an entry point. The design, simultaneous multi-point entry, stun grenades to create a disorientation window, and trained operators who could engage threats within seconds, was engineered to collapse the defender's decision cycle. Second was the value of purpose-built disorientation devices. The L2A1 stun grenade used at Mogadishu became the direct ancestor of the modern flashbang. Its effect was measurable. Hijackers who survived described being unable to respond coherently for several seconds after detonation. Those seconds were the operational window. Third was the operational model of Allied cooperation. GSG9 succeeded in part because of British technology and expertise. In the years after Mogadishu, this relationship became a model for Allied counterterrorism cooperation. Intelligence sharing, technology transfer, joint training, and operational coordination. Before Mogadishu, the assessment of European governments' ability to execute such operations was uncertain. Munich had demonstrated failure. Entebbe had demonstrated success, but by a state with unique strategic conditions. What had not been demonstrated was whether a European liberal democracy could build and deploy the same capability under constitutional constraints. Mogadishu answered that question. It demonstrated that West Germany had built, in 4 years from a standing start, a counterterrorism unit capable of executing a complex night assault in a foreign country against armed opponents with explosives, with 0 fatalities among the hostages and the assault team. This demonstration had deterrence value. Future planners targeting West German nationals or aircraft had to account for the Mogadishu capability. The political calculation changed. The West German state had demonstrated both the will and the means to respond with force. In the years following Mogadishu, GSG9 was institutionalized as a permanent element of West Germany's security architecture. Its budget increased, its training expanded, its relationships with allied counterterrorism organizations deepened, and its operational experience at Mogadishu was systematically analyzed and documented. Techniques that worked were refined and integrated. Near failures were analyzed and addressed. This process of systematic learning, the after-action review, became part of the unit's doctrine. The Lufthansa 181 crisis also illuminated aircraft hijacking as a strategic problem. An aircraft is a mobile, contained environment with a defined physical configuration, limited entry points, a known number of personnel, and a specific vulnerability profile. It moves, creating planning complexity. But it also cannot be fortified like a building. And it eventually lands, creating an operational window. The strategic lesson is that any government that wishes to protect aviation from hostage scenarios must invest in 2 parallel capabilities: prevention, intelligence, airport security, behavioral profiling, air marshal programs. Response: a dedicated counterterrorism unit with the training, equipment, and legal authority to execute aircraft assault operations anywhere in the world its aircraft might land. Mogadishu demonstrated that the response capability was viable. The investment required to build GSG9, sustained funding, international partnerships, legal framework development, and continuous training, paid strategic dividends that extended far beyond the 86 lives saved on October 18, 1977. The Mogadishu rescue is remembered as a dramatic event. The darkness, the fire on the runway, to the stun grenades, the 7-minute assault. These details are accurate. But the deeper analysis reveals something more important. Mogadishu was the product of 4 years of institutional investment. It was the product of the political decision to create GSG9 after Munich. It was the product of selection and training processes that developed the operators who executed the assault. It was the product of intelligence relationships that provided technical documentation and aircraft access. It was the product of diplomacy that secured Somali cooperation and created a permissive environment. It was the product of allied cooperation with the SAS that provided the stun grenades and expertise. The crisis did not create the capability. The capability created the possibility of a crisis with a positive outcome. This is the structural lesson of Mogadishu. Counterterrorism capability cannot be improvised at the moment of crisis. It must be built before the crisis, through sustained institutional investment. West Germany built that capability. And when the moment came, the system worked. Structure determined the outcome. That is always where the analysis begins. You have been watching The Command Structure. Subscribe if you think in systems.